Now, speaking exclusively to ET Now, New Zealand Trade Minister Todd McClay called India as a strategic priority and said the agreement reflects growing trust between the two nations. McClay also highlighted that New Zealand exporters will get zero tariff rates from day one, while 95% of exports to India will eventually see full tariff reductions. Listen in to this exclusive conversation.
Look, it's a significant deal for New Zealand, and we think a very big achievement. It underpins the strong relationship that New Zealand and India has. When we came to government just 2.5 years ago, we said our relationship with India would be a strategic priority for New Zealand, from economics and trade to defence to culture to sport, right across the board. And we've seen engagement from both sides, New Zealanders to India. This is my 8th visit in 2 years. As an example, Minister Goyal, other ministers have been to New Zealand. We're honoured to have the first visit of the President of India to New Zealand, first visit in a very, very long period of time. So it's underpinned now, or the epitome of that is the trade agreement. And for New Zealand, it's about having options. We're an export nation. We're only 5 million people. We produce more than we could ever consume ourselves, some of the highest quality and safest food and fibre anywhere you'll find in the world. And so this allows New Zealanders to build relationships with India, just as India is doing trade deals with parts of the world so that your exporters too have options. The most important part of this is a common set of rules that Indian and New Zealand businesses can rely upon. And at a time of great global trade uncertainty, two nations saying we like each other, we trust each other, we want to do more business with each other, must be welcome news.
Right, Minister McClay, since you've spoken about the fact that New Zealand, of course, pretty much like India, has trade deals with many other countries, including the European Union, the UK as well. There is, of course, trade with China as well. How will you ensure that India gets market access and, of course, preferential access to its market? Because you do export a lot of agriculture and a lot of other commodities as well, industrial goods to other countries. But how will how will India get competitive access and preferential access, if I may say?
Well, for the New Zealand market, on day one of entry into force, Indian exporters will have a zero tariff rate across the board. So we have liberalised fully in as far as access to New Zealand is concerned. We do that because actually we think competition is a very good thing. We want our consumers to have choice of products from different markets, and it also helps to keep prices low, for New Zealand consumers. In return, we've got some of, unprecedented access. Almost 95% of what we export to India will have full tariff elimination or significant tariff reductions when fully in force, and that's something that offers huge opportunity. But for New Zealand exporters, they play a role in many parts of the world. We have many trade agreements. With India, it's an opportunity to do more than trade. I think actually in services, in those people-to-people links, you will see where the agreement really flourishes, and that in itself is something to be celebrated.
Absolutely. When you talk about services, we do have access in 118, I believe, subsectors as far as services are concerned. I'll touch upon that in just a bit, but since you mentioned about, the trade deal and the fact that it also involves an investment commitment, could you clarify whether this is an investment commitment or a commitment to invest in India $20 billion over the next 5 years?
Well, for New Zealanders, I've often found it hard to invest in parts of the world, and with India navigating the rules and the regulations. So the two sides have each made a commitment. We've committed to promote investment, to help New Zealand companies find their way to the Indian market and to invest. So our commitment is to promote, and in return India has set up a single desk to fast-track investment so that New Zealanders have certainly their ability to come here. Already I have companies with me that are looking to the Indian market. Now, it's not investment from the point of view of coming and just putting money in a bank. Many of them will set up offices in India, and they will employ Indian and New Zealand people to do that work. India as a nation is open and building and opening more universities each year than any country in the world, I think. Almost more airports every year than any country of the world. And so New Zealand companies now have an ability to come and be involved in that, and there are rights and obligations that come along with it. In fact, we have an Indian New Zealander who manufactures beds in New Zealand. He has committed and already started a $200 million investment into a manufacturing facility in India. Part of the Indian market, but he also sees an opportunity to sell to the countries in the region. And so that's what a trade agreement can do. Historically, it's about buying and selling, and one country wants to sell and not buy. Well, we think in this agreement we've got the balance right, and you'll see investment flows in both directions that ultimately will be good for both economies.
Absolutely. Minister McClay, you have mentioned about manufacturing, you've also mentioned services, but what are the other segments of interest to you? Because, $20 billion is not really a small amount. And, India, if you see, we have policies, domestic policies to boost sectors specifically related to renewable energy. There is, of course, there are schemes for boosting manufacturing in the country in the space of electronics, in the space of autos and many other sectors. So which of these areas are of significant interest to New Zealand and the citizens of New Zealand?
Well, now that the agreement has been completed and signed, the work can start to identify some of the early wins and the more sustainable areas. The commitment to invest means that we'll work very closely the commitment to promote investment means that we'll work very closely with our private sector and others in some of those areas. I think certainly in the manufacture of food there are some opportunities there. I visited the leather sector in Agra earlier, as mentioned, and they want to find pelts from New Zealand that they will bring, and there will be trade, there will be investment to make sure the quality they need to make some of the highest quality shoes for stores in the biggest cities of the world. And so much of that is very exciting. It's over a 15-year period, so some of the things that the agreement will allow us to grow in, we will see in the future. But it's an absolute commitment on the part of the New Zealand government to promote that investment, to bring people here, just as we will, already meeting Indians who want to come and invest in New Zealand. It will be a win-win.
Absolutely, and you have undertaken 8 visits already in the past 2 years, and of course we do hope that this is only going to continue, when you particularly talk about this investment or this commitment to sort of keep investing and explore these kind of opportunities. But Minister McClay, if I may ask you, what is the timeline that you have in mind for the implementation of this pact to come into force?
Well, we've signed today. Tomorrow in New Zealand the agreement is tabled in our Parliament along with a national analysis. It goes off to a select committee for a short period of time where all New Zealanders can submit and talk to the agreement, and then once that's finished we will table the legislation. So both sides have agreed we want to work very hard to try and get it in place as quickly as possible. We think that can be done before the end of this year. And if that can be achieved, which we should work very hard to achieve, it means for Indian exporters they will have a zero tariff rate into New Zealand on day one, and for New Zealand exporters, particularly in some of the areas where we produce food that you don't have in India or you don't have year-round, they'll have access so that Indian consumers will continue to have more choice.
Right. Minister, let me ask you a bunch of final set of questions before we let you go, and this is essentially about, understanding India's sensitivities, and that was something that Minister Goel was also mentioning at the press conference earlier in the day, that, partnership between the two sides has to be based on complementarity in one aspect, but it also has to recognize the sensitivities that both the sides really have. So we do have sensitivities in the area of agri-dairy and, related sectors, and I think that's where New Zealand has made concessions. So I just want to get a sense from you in terms of what the negotiations were really like and what kind of concessions you had to give away to sort of incorporate this in the agreement.
A traditional trade negotiation is about concessions. Our approach was very different. We understood there were always sensitivities on both sides and that we would look for solutions to that rather than keeping negotiating, which sometimes can feel like argument. A trade agreement must be complementary, and this one absolutely is. And so there are wins on both sides. Where there are sensitivities, we've looked to address them carefully. As an example, there is access for food from New Zealand, dairy as an example, with infant formula. We know there is a growing demand or necessity for that. In India, we produce some of the world's highest quality and safest product, and so that becomes available. An area that was less sensitive, perhaps. But what I think will allow our two dairy industries to come more closely together is the ability for New Zealand to export all food at a zero tariff rate for it to be re-exported where value will be added. So I think what you will find is it already has been happening, that New Zealand companies and Indian companies will look to work together, combine the products to add extra value and appeal and to export to other parts of the world. And so over time, I think you will see those sorts of things grow. But the absolute commitment on our part, because we believe this is important, is to help to grow the Indian agricultural economy. You know, New Zealand food producers are some of the most efficient, some of the most productive, and certainly the safest food production anywhere in the world. So a lot of that technology and the understanding and the knowledge we will bring across. And so many young New Zealanders will come and work closely with people in India to help increase what farmers earn.
Right, but would New Zealand be open to negotiations as far as the agri sector is concerned to look for further complementarities in future?
Well, one of the things we have agreed in this agreement is 12 months after it enters into force, a committee is set up to monitor the implementation, but also to look to improve the agreement over time. So there'll be opportunities on day one to say, actually, we could do the following things that would be good for our economies. We can open up more, or we can change the way we're implementing. And so you should view this as a high-quality, comprehensive free trade agreement that is also a living agreement. So rather than waiting 5 or 10 years and doing a big upgrade, every year we can continue to cooperate and find ways to, bolster trade and continue to ensure that it delivers for the citizens of both countries.
Right. Minister McClay, you also mentioned about the fact that, if India has a sensitivity, we did not keep on negotiating. As New Zealand and India did not really get stuck to negotiating that particular aspect, and we moved on from there. But what do you have to say for countries that do not respect sensitivities of other countries and that strike unilateral trading deals?
Well, ultimately, it's for each country to decide for themselves. New Zealand is very clear. A rules-based approach for bringing down costs and tariff rates grows economic prosperity. Each country must decide for itself. We have trade agreements, double tax agreements, or investment agreements with 100 countries of the world, and our agreement with India is significant. It is of very, very high quality. It will bring down tariff rates. It will grow two-way trade equally between our nations, and it will mean greater prosperity for our citizens. To others in the world, they must decide their own path, but if they look at what New Zealand and India has achieved in just 9 months, there is a hint as to how you grow your economy.
Absolutely. And one final question, I have to ask you this, because at the press conference there was an exchange of gifts, and you gifted a portrait of a jersey with Minister Goel's name on that. What's the backstory behind that?
So it actually is a jersey from our T20 cricket team used in the final when India and New Zealand played against each other just a few months ago. Yes. And India, of course, was victorious. But during the negotiation in November, I came to speak at a conference, and then went to Mumbai to Minister Goel's home electorate, and we went to watch a charity cricket match with young doctors from around the city. I did a coin toss and started off, and then they offered me a chance to bat. So the New Zealand Trade Minister took the cricket bat in the middle of the field with thousands of people surrounding, and the Indian Commerce Minister and his own electorate in front of a home crowd with the TV cameras bowled me out. So I gave him the jersey, which is actually from the final, with his name on it, and a photograph of the two of us celebrating after he knocked my wickets down.
Well, with that, it's a wrap on India Tonight. Goodbye from me, Shabani Gharat, and the entire team of ET Now.